Here we are at chapter 18, Mr. Spell's Mother. Rat-a-tat-tat! The echo of Winks's knocking at Mrs. Spell's door filled the underground passage and made the children jump. They turned around angrily. Winks, you should not have done that. But I tell you, it says Mrs. Spell's on this nameplate, began Winks. Just then the door opened, and a black cat stood politely there with a little apron around its tubby waist. If you've brought the papers, please don't knock so loudly again, said the cat, politely but crossly. We were in the middle of a spell, and you made my mistress upset half of it, and now we've made a spell to make things small instead of big by mistake. It's most annoying. He slammed the door, almost hitting Winks's nose. The children came running up, Peter calling out breathlessly. I say, I do believe that was old Cinders, Mr. Spell's cat. He has such enormous green eyes, like green traffic lights shining out. Was it really? Said Molly. Well, let's ask him if he is. Why, Mr. Spell's might be here himself. That would save us quite a long journey. Dare we to knock again? Said Peter. That cat was really very cross. I'm not afraid of a cross cat, said Winks boldly, and he lifted the knocker and knocked again. He also found a bell, and he rang that too. Rat-a-tat-tat, jingle-jangle-jing. Mr. Pigglepie's door flew open, and a cross voice called out, Who's making all that noise? Just wait until I get dressed, and I'll come and chase you. Ooh, that must have been Mr. Pigglepie, said Winks. Bother, he's shut his door again. Now I shan't know what he's like. Then Mrs. Spell's door flew open, and the cat appeared again, but this time it behaved much more like a real cat. It spat at Winks, and it scratched him on the hand. It was just about to shut the door again when Peter called out, I say, aren't you Cinders? The cat stared at him. Yes, I'm Cinders. Oh, I remember you. You're the boy who came with a girl to rescue Pixie, and I helped my master to do a spell to wake him up. What are you doing here, hammering away at our door? Well, we were really on our way to see Mr. Spell's, said Peter. But Winks here noticed the name Mrs. Spell's on the door, and he knocked. He thought that she might be some relation to Mr. Spell's. She is. She's his mother, said Cinders. I came here to help the old lady with a new spell, the one that you spoiled by making her jump. My master is coming to call for me in a few minutes. Oh, is he? Cried Peter joyfully. Well, then, do you think we might stay and see him? We do so badly want his help. Well, come in then, said the cat. I don't know about this brownie, though. Winks, you call him? Banging and ringing like that. You wait until Mr. Pigglepie is dressed and comes after him. He'll get in such trouble. I don't want to stay out in the passage, said Winks nervously. I'll be very good and quiet and helpful if you'll let me come in. Who is that standing gossiping at the door? Suddenly called an annoyed voice. Tell them either to go or to come in. You better come in and wait for Mr. Spell's, said Cinders. And so they all trooped in, and Cinders shut the door. Winks was quite glad to be out of the passage, away from a possibly furious Mr. Pigglepie. The cat led them into a remarkably big room with 3 windows. The children were so astonished to see what the windows looked out on that they quite forgot their manners for a moment. And they didn't even greet the bent old lady who sat in a chair in the middle of the room. For when one of the windows looked out on the sea. Yes, it was the sea. It was as blue as could be. Another window looked out on a sunny hillside. The third looked out on an ordinary backyard where the laundry was blowing in the wind. Most extraordinary. Well, said rather a peevish voice, have the children of today no manners at all? Can't you even say how to do to an old lady? Oh dear, said Molly, quite ashamed of herself. Please, Mrs. Spell's, I'm so sorry. Do forgive us, but it did seem so extraordinary seeing 3 windows like this in an underground room, and one of them looking out on the sea, too. Well, I thought the sea was miles and miles away from here. Things aren't always what they seem, said Mrs. Spell's. What is miles away for you may be quite near for me. Now, what was all this noise about at my front door? Why, when I was younger, I would have turned you all into pattering little mice and given you to cinders for making a noise of that sort in a respectable place like this." "Madame," said the cat, seeing that the old lady was working herself up into a temper, "Madame, these children know Mr. Spells, your son." The old lady beamed at once. "Oh, do you know my son? Well, why didn't you tell me that? Cinders, make some strawberryade, please, with the strawberry ice and some strawberry biscuits." Now, this sounded exciting. And when it came, beautifully arranged on a large silver tray by Cinders, it was just as exciting as it sounded. For there was a pink drink made of strawberry juice, and in it were pieces of ice shaped like strawberries. And the biscuit had tiny sugar strawberries right in the middle. "This is lovely," said Peter. "Thank you very much." There came the sound of a key in the door. "Oh, my son, Mr. Spells," said Mrs. Spells. "Here he is." And there he was again, just the same as before, tall and commanding, but this time dressed in a long green cloak that shimmered like water. He looked very surprised indeed to see the visitors. "Why, I've seen you before," he said to the children. "How are you? Quite well, I hope. And let me see. Have I seen this brownie before? Yes, I have. Aren't you the bad fellow who turned all of his grandmother's pigs blue? Isn't your name Winks?" "Yes, Mr. Spells, sir," said Winks. "I hope you got into trouble for that," said Mr. Spells. "I had a terrible job turning those pigs back to their right color again. I believe they've still got blue tails." Winks wished that the floor would open and swallow him up, but it didn't. Mr. Spells turned to Peter. "Well, have you come to visit my dear old mother?" he said. Peter explained how it was that they were in his mother's room, and then he told the enchanter about poor Pixie and the chair. "Good gracious," said Mr. Spells, "we must certainly find out where that chair has gone. If it falls into the hands of some rogue, he can use it for all kinds of wrong purposes. And Pixie, too, what a silly thing to do, to tie his foot to the chair. Why didn't he tie the chair to the door handle or something like that?" "We didn't think of that," said Peter. "Can you help us to find out where the chair is, and Pixie too, Mr. Spells?" "Of course," said Mr. Spells. "Now, let me think for a moment. Now, this happened at night, you say? And the chair, as usual, flew up into the sky?" "Yes," said everyone. "Well, then, who was about that night in the sky who might possibly have seen the chair and Pixie?" said Mr. Spells thoughtfully. "Hoot the owl," said the old lady at once. "Oh, quite right, Mother," said Mr. Spells. "Splendid idea. We'll call Hoot the owl and see if he knows anything about this. He is a very wise and observant bird, you know," he said, turning to the children. "He never misses anything that goes on at night." "Shall we go and ask him if he knows anything, then?" said Molly. "Well, where does he live?" "Oh, we'll get him here," said Mr. Spells. "That's the easiest way. I'll go out and call him." Mr. Spells went to the window that looked out on the sunny hillside. He clapped his hands 3 times and muttered a word so magical that Winks trembled in his shoes. And a very curious thing happened. The sunny hillside went dark as night, and behind the trees shone a little moon. It was all very peculiar, especially as the sun still shone out in the backyard and on the sea that could be seen from the other window. "I must make it dark or the owl won't come," explained Mr. Spells. "Now I'll call him." He put his hands up to his mouth and placed his thumbs carefully together, and he blew gently. And to the children's delight and surprise, the hoot of an owl came from his closed hands. "Hoo-hoo! Hoo-hoo! Hoo-hoo!" An answering hoot came from outside the window. A dark shadow passed across the room. Then a big owl flew silently down and perched on Mr. Spells's shoulder. He caressed the big-eyed creature, while Cinders looked on rather jealously. "Hoot," said Mr. Spells. "Listen carefully. 2 nights ago a wishing chair flew off into the sky, and hanging to it by a rope tied to his foot was a pixie. "Did you see any of this?" "Hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo-hoo," answered the owl, hooting softly into Mr. Spells's ear. "Thank you, Hoot," said Mr. Spells, looking quite grave. "You may go." The owl flew off silently. Mr. Spells waited a moment and then muttered another very magic word. The moonlit hillside grew lighter and lighter, and hey presto, it was the sun behind the trees now and not the moon, and daylight was again everywhere. "What did the owl tell you?" asked Peter. "Oh, I forgot you couldn't understand," said Mr. Spells. "Well, he saw the chair, and Pixie too, dangling by the foot. He followed them out of curiosity, and he says that they flew near the Wandering Castle, where Giant Twisty lives, and that the giant must have seen them and captured them. He saw no more of them after that." Well, this was very bad news indeed. "Oh dear. Whatever are we going to do then?" said Peter at last. "Poor little Pixie." "I must help you," said Mr. Spells. "I can't let Twisty own that chair. Sit down. We must think of a plan." And when we read again together next, it will be chapter 19, Away on Another Adventure. Maybe next time Edward will join us.